Welcome, colleagues. Anthony McKay, President and CEO of the National Centre on Education and the Economy based in Washington, DC, and a very warm welcome to this OECD-sponsored Ed Palooza session, The Moment of Truth for Educational Technology. I'm delighted to be joined by four remarkable colleagues, and I'm going to ask each in turn if they might just say a word about themselves and to include perhaps just one observation that might give us some sense of where they're coming from as we enter into this, I think, very, very powerful session. Obviously, the moment of truth for educational technology, as the title, speaks to our current situation in a very powerful way. Let me begin with Dirk van Dam. Dirk, thank you for sponsoring this session from the OECD perspective. Just say a word about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm an academic, but I'm with the OECD for now 12, 13 years as head of the Center for Educational Research and Innovation. And with regard to this topic, I'm constantly oscillating between being a techno-optimist and impressed by what is possible and being a techno-sceptic or techno-pessimist because there is so little effective use of educational technology, and what is used is often so counterproductive and so detrimental to both cognitive advancement of learners and social equality of opportunity or whatever. So I'm intrigued by this question, is why educational technology is not delivering what its promises, what its potential are. And I hope to find answers from the three colleagues that I invited to join this session.
Well, Dirk, thank you very much indeed. Ape, let me go to you.
Yep. So, hi, I'm Ape Pohjavirta. It's an easy name. My name is A-Class Ape. I'm from Finland. Finland. We are the happiest nation. We are the most innovative nation. We have the best educational technology. We have everything is, Finland. We have everything at the beginning of the December except for lights. There's no lights. And that is why we have to, you see this halo that is behind my head? It comes from within. We Finns, we are just so much better. And that is why I'm here to tell you how you all can be fine people, the finer version of yourselves. Thank you.
Ape, that's great. So look, anybody who thinks they've arrived at the wrong session, stay with us. This is the right session. Ape, how do you feel about Estonia claiming that they're now the education nation? That must be a bit awkward for you.
What was the name of the country?
So let me now go to, I would like our Estonian friends to stay as well. So we promise to become more courteous as this session unfolds. Justin, welcome. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks so much for having me. My name is Justin Reich. I'm on the faculty at MIT, and I run a lab called the Teaching Systems Lab, which aspires to design, implement, and research the future of teacher learning. And I have a recent book out with Harvard University Press called Failure to Disrupt: Why Technology Alone Can't Transform Education.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that Alison is still with us. I don't see...
I see her right there.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. And I'm Alison Littlejohn. I'm the director of the UCL Knowledge Lab at University College London. The lab is a research centre looking at the future of learning and communication with technology. And you asked for one thing about myself, which might be surprising. So I started my career, my PhD is in rocket propellants and explosives, which just goes to show that in the area of educational technology, you get people from all different disciplines.
Alison, thank you so much. This is going to be, as you say, Dirk, a fascinating conversation. Let me just say one word. Obviously, we've chosen this at a moment when many of us believe that this last year of 2020, with the COVID-19 pandemic, has I think, Dirk, in your language, brought the promise of educational technology from the periphery into people's daily lives. And the impact that we've talked about during this year in multiple educational circles, convenings that have been taking place literally every day, is that this has been experienced immediately and constantly by learners, by educators, by parents, and obviously by education agencies and organisations that have been attempting to respond to the circumstances we find ourselves in and to ensure that learning can take place enhanced by, and at times only enabled through technology. So that's the context in which we are going to have this conversation, and the possibility that either the moment of truth or the moment of real possibility has arrived for educational technology. With that in mind, Justin, I'm going to ask you, as I ask each of you in turn, to make your opening comments, and I'll encourage you to try and limit that to between 5 and 7 minutes. So please, colleagues who are joining us here, if I give my esteemed guests a warning of 1 minute, that won't be lack of courtesy. The question is whether, in fact, they're going to respond to my encouragement to wrap up. But I think if we can proceed in that way,
be well behaved, Tony.
That's great. And then we'll come together and have a conversation between us. I might just let you know that there could be a question just to clarify something that you're saying, if you don't mind me intervening briefly on that in that way, just as we proceed. But Justin, let me pass to you first, and I hope that you'll acknowledge the recent release of your most recent book. Please do.
Sure. So over the last 2 decades, education technology entrepreneurs had made a series of really astounding claims about the potential power of technology to reshape learning systems. So in 2009, Clay Christensen said that by 2019, half of all secondary school courses in the United States would be online, that they would cost as third as much to provision in 2019 as they did in 2009, and they would provide better outcomes. In the wave of MOOC mania that Coursera and edX and FutureLearn came out of, Sebastian Thrun from Udacity said that in 50 years, there might be 10 mega institutions of higher education left. Sal Khan had a TED Talk in 2011 that said, let's use video to reinvent education. Let's sit each individual child down in front of a terminal and have them have an algorithmically optimized learning experience, kind of punctuated by group projects facilitated by teachers. Sugata Mitra, who won the 2013 TED Prize, said, went even further, said all of that was unnecessary, that groups of children with access to a laptop and the internet can teach anything themselves. And, at the heart of all these claims, which, people nod and laugh, but these ideas were taken very seriously for a decade or two, that we were sort of on the cusp of this dramatic transformation. And underneath all of these is the claim that new technologies were going to prove in short order to be better than the existing education system. And then, in different parts of the world at different times, but starting around March, the pandemic blighted the world and 1.6 billion learners had to learn from home or remotely. And so new technologies didn't have to beat an existing education system. They had to prove more valuable than a hobbled, trammeled, pandemic-inflected system. And on that account, there's lots of variation across all different places in the world. But I think overwhelmingly, as you say, most students, most families, most educators have experienced remote learning as somewhere between disappointing and disastrous. So trying to understand why these folks were so wrong is a helpful exercise for figuring out where technology can be helpful. I think the education technology evangelists made maybe 3 kinds of mistakes that are important. The first is that they conceptualized education technology as sweeping and tremendously powerful, that these tools were bulldozers that could knock away the future or Swiss Army knives. But in fact, the technologies that we build, they're more like very particularly shaped pegs for very particular holes. The work of education is unbelievably granular. Like somewhere right now around the world, there's someone trying to teach kindergartners to tie their shoes online. There's someone trying to teach a 7th grader to be a patriotic citizen. There's someone trying to teach how to conjugate Latin verbs to a 9th grader. All of these things are immensely different. And our technologies tend to be useful for some people, but not others, in some subjects, but not others, in some contexts, but not others. A second big mistake is thinking that education technologies can be flipped on and off like a switch. That if you just buy this stuff and download it, that better learning happens. But that's not at all the case. Our technologies are only as powerful as the communities of educators and families that guide their use. Every technology solution is a human capital problem. And for all the investment that's happened in various places in the world for new technologies, virtually none of that has been complemented by sufficient investment in professional learning and human capital for teachers to be able to use these things. And then people just consistently underestimate the conservatism of educational systems. The two dominant technologies of pandemic are two of our very oldest education technologies. The first are learning management systems, things which let people pass documents back and forth, which were developed, theorized in the 60s and 70s, commercialized in the 90s, made open source in the 2000s. And then the second technology, the one that we're using right now, when it was developed in the 1930s, was called video telephony. And what you get when you combine video telephony with a learning management system is a kind of two-part platform that lets you replicate as closely as possible the existing arrangements that happen in face-to-face classrooms. One way to characterize what happened in secondary schools and higher education around the world is that teachers who predominantly have been lecturing from their lecterns went home to their home offices, sat down in front of their webcam, and as closely as possible kept teaching as much as they could the way they had been doing before, despite the dramatic change in global circumstances. Primary educators did roughly the same thing, except it was a disaster because 7-year-olds don't have the executive function or fine motor skills to operate technology to be able to participate remotely. So if you had a parent at home, the parent was driven crazy and you learned okay. And if you didn't have a parent at home, you were abandoned effectively by the system. So those three pieces of not understanding that our technologies are specific for learning rather than general, not understanding that they require tremendous systems change rather than being flipped on and off like a switch, and consistently underestimating the conservatism of education systems. And we will not, in our lifetimes, see a more powerful demonstration of the conservatism of global education than we've seen in the last 9 months as educators around the world, as systems around the world have in a moment of profound change, have hewn very, very closely to models that already existed.
Justin, let me just ask you this though. Your description of from disappointing to disastrous. If I said to you, well, that could be just a little bit of an overgeneralization, I could point to countries that have prepared themselves for this moment. I'm not suggesting that it wouldn't still be on your conservative spectrum, but if I look at places like South Korea or Singapore or Hong Kong or Finland or Estonia, I might be able to point to ways in which they had already moved into a digital learning world and indeed have done a little better than disappointing. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, I'm not an expert in all those places. I've definitely talked to folks in Hong Kong and other folks, and there's nowhere. I haven't talked to a group of practicing educators yet, though I haven't talked to people in all those countries who have told me, no, this is going fine. Like we pretty much had it under control. We're pretty happy with how things went. The other thing, and all which as you know so well, makes global comparisons hard. A number of the countries that you mentioned also did a reasonable job managing the pandemic. And so weren't forced into sort of full-time online learning, with all of its uncertainties as much as the United States has, where our response has been, a complete disaster. But I do think, one way to take your comment is to say, if you're in kindergarten today, this is probably not the only global pandemic you will live through in your lifetime. That because of climate change, because of the incursions and destruction of the natural world, because of the changing temperatures, we are far more likely not only to see more pandemics, but extreme weather events. In the United States, a third of our country was on fire like it's never been before in months, as it was in Australia and other places. So education systems are going to have to become more resilient to these kinds of interruptions. And this is a tragic practice run, but probably an important one.
Okay, just to put you on notice, Justin, as we come back together as a group, Failure to Disrupt, the title of your most recent book, I'm assuming that if I prompt you at that point and say, okay, it's not about interruption, it's about disruption, you'll respond. Yep.
You got it. But let everybody else talk too.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, brilliant. Ape, I'm going to pass to you. And as you say, very different situation in perfect Finland.
Yeah, Finland is not perfect. We are eternally curious, and we are and I think that's Justin. I loved it. Tony, with your permission, thank you for that. I'll put this more into a kind of a dialoguean format, of dialogue than just dead presentations. So, I must say that most of the things, or probably everything that Justin said, makes sense and is true. But because of the complexity of humanity and because of the complexity of the era that we're living in, things are so complicated that there's oversimplification that is taking place, especially in this field of technology industry where, sorry to say this, where kind of the tone of the whole industry is defined by the Silicon Valley venture capitalists. Because that's kind of the only place in the world that has enough power to give one individual organization the tools that they need to try to establish a global change through clever use of technology. And that's why we have taken a different stance. I regard myself, like you said in one of the notes, you said that I regard myself as an evangelist, but I'm not an EdTech evangelist. I'm an evangelist for technology to be used so that humanity can and will have a better future for itself. And that's kind of, so I'm not talking about EdTech, I'm talking about LearnTech. What can we learn from, because I've seen, for you folks, all of this huge crowd of 23 less us, I invented the mobile app in 2003. And if someone asked me in October of that year, what is going to happen in this world, I would have said, I would have made predictions, and I could not have imagined that the extended idea and concept of mobility transforms whole industries. It just, a couple of decades, it has changed the way the world listens to music, plays games, communicates over social networks, and yet it hasn't changed the way we learn. Now, that's actually not true. It has changed the way we learn, but it hasn't changed the way the education system educates the people within that education system. And there's a huge difference between these two things. A few years back at an OECD event that was not sponsored, a guy came to me and asked, what is Snapchat doing? What is the approach towards Snapchat in the education system of Finland? And I said, Snapchat is, it is used for this and it is used for that. And the guy was like, how could you do that change so fast? And I said, well, we didn't, but the kids started using the application and they learn with it and they use different things. And that is where I want to, and that is why I like the idea of the whole EdTech industry saying that, oops, we didn't change anything. And that's something that they should all take a look at. The service that we're developing, and I'm not even going to name it because it's the best in the world, in the multiverse, we took a different approach. When we started developing, this was my third endeavor in the field of mobile learning. We went to the hugely successful mobile Finnish games companies and looked at how do people behave, what kind of sessions do they produce at the end of the mobile connection when they're playing games. Because when they're playing games, they're driven by their intrinsic motivation, and they actually want to play those games. And we thought, our hypothesis was that if we can create a mechanism that transforms educational content into something that can be delivered to those mobile devices, and that produces that similar behavioral pattern at that end, then those people should be driven by their motivation, intrinsic motivation. They should be open to learning new things. And that's what we've done. So we have actually taken technology that exists. So we have a concept of robust technology. Robust technology, we think, means that education is a human right, and everyone should have access to learning. That is why it shouldn't be limited to smartphones. It can't be limited to MOOC, video-based pedagogy, because people don't have time, 45 minutes time, to sit down and look at lectures and make notes and do this and do that. So we've taken a different approach. We've looked at how do people learn using a mobile device, and how could we then give them access to more learning and use that more learning as a catalyst to drive the change of the educational industry itself.
Yeah.
My good friend Paul Kim said a decade ago, when we were sitting in the sun outside on the Stanford campus, Paul said, Ape, the education industry will not renew itself. We need to bypass it.
Yeah.
Because everyone in the education industry are children of the education industry, and they cannot do what they would need to do to transform it. That's, I'm just, Justin, give me a book and, I'll buy it from you. I'm eating your dog food.
Ape, I was going to ask you exactly that question, because the way in which people are learning, as you point out, they are learning differently. They are using mobile devices. They are using that technology. Your language is they are bypassing the education system, which Justin has claimed is conservative.
Yes,
so
and I will use Justin's quotation forever in my presentations from today on. So good luck with that, Justin.
But Ape, you also saying you are not seeing evidence of shifts within the education institutions that we currently have. Surely you must be witnessing, even within the conservatism, you must be seeing some shifts in the use of mobile technology to enhance learning of the kind that you're talking about.
I'll give you a short answer. Yes, I see shifts. But the big challenge here is that if, as humanity we have 15 years or 20 years to reach the sustainable development goals that we need to achieve, because we got to start living a more sustainable life on this planet. And that transformation, the changes in the behavior of the whole population of our planet, these small nudges that we're seeing somewhere in a country called Estonia or whatever, Espoo, the city of Finland, Estonia on the southern side. So that's it's not enough.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Justin, I think we'll come back to you about what you really mean by system change. Yep. Okay. Alison, please join us. And if you can join us with image, that would be great. We don't have your image at the moment.
Right. Can you see me now?
No.
I can.
Oh, okay. Good. You can. Just me.
Actually, I do have some images to show, and Mike's going to bring them up just in a second, because following on from what Ape and Justin have just been saying, what I want to do is just turn attention slightly to the people, because, of course, learning happens through people, through learners themselves, and they're assisted and scaffolded by teachers. So it was just unbelievable this year when, here are the figures, 1.3 billion children around the world out of education, learning remotely if it was possible. So that's quite staggering. And what we also found was universities were working from home as well, and so students had to study online. And generally in the university system, there was more opportunity for people to actually study and be supported online by the teachers. So is there anything that we can learn from university education that could be helpful? So we actually studied what happened to our colleagues at University College London from March. We put out a survey. We asked people to upload images that depict how they feel about the pandemic. And so these images give us some of the moment of truth for educational technology. And I want to share some of them with you, with 5 highlights that we found. The first thing was, this isn't just about learning online, it's also about a very distributed workforce. So people were not working from the office, they were working from home. And people were very creative in terms of how they created their office spaces at home. So here's what we found, that people weren't just simply in their office, they were on the kitchen table, bedside table, outdoors, home gym area. There were all kinds of places that teachers were teaching from. And what that actually means is that you can have, two different people who are teaching the same group of students, but they're in very different circumstances. So on the left, you have someone who's got a quite nice office space. On the right hand side, with someone in a home share where they have one small bedroom and they have to work literally on the bed. So this is the truth for educational technology. We have to think about the context in which people are working. Now, the next thing is we found that some people felt really isolated working from home, while others felt this is the most productive I've ever been. So we asked people to send images of how they felt. And we got these kinds of things, everything from isolated to working on a moon base to being an island to a whole mixture of feelings, because actually we feel multiple things. We quite like working at home sometimes. Other times it's really challenging for us. And the ways that we engaged with other people really changed radically. So we did move away from these lectures online. And of course, what we did, lectures in the classroom, and what we did was lectures online. And everything that we've been doing has been through this lens, this interface of the various platforms that we've been using. And we're wondering, so why is it that we're not really able to connect with people the way that we could when we were face to face? And yet many people are using the same pedagogies that they did face to face and expecting those to translate online. So there's a huge learning curve that people have to go through to enable them to understand how to teach online, and for learners themselves to be highly self-regulated to be able to learn online, because at the moment the kinds of technologies that are predominant for online learning require a high degree of self-regulation. So this has been the world according to Zoom. And yes, so someone uploaded this cartoon for us, which is quite interesting. You do your 9 to 5 work, or however many hours you're actually working, because actually your students are around the world, so you're working around the clock. Then when you leave home, you just turn around 360 degrees and you're socializing from home as well. And that has been the reality for people. And we got this sketch here which shows the various different assemblages and communities that people are in. So, on the left-hand side, somebody trying to work from home and, a partner talking to them. On the right-hand side, somebody trying to connect with people around the world, cats coming into view, pets. How do we make this a better experience for students? So what we've been finding as people work from home is that communities are colliding together as never before. So on the left-hand side, you can see there are all kinds of screens, communities, things that we're doing online. On the right-hand side, by working from home, you have all the different people at home who are connecting together. So that can be quite complex and difficult. And you can see here, some people have had to share spaces with a partner or someone else. So they're literally working face to face with someone and trying to give pastoral care to students at the other side of the world. That has been really, really difficult. So these multiple competing roles as we work from home have been difficult as well. and we had a lot of images like this, particularly from women. So, you know, on the one hand, you're trying to be a primary school teacher and homeschooling your kid, you're doing home care, and you're also trying to teach online. The image on the right just shows all the multiple things that this colleague is doing. And I had a very good conversation with her where she said the reason she's holding up the laptop is she wants to look professional and she doesn't want people to see all the chaos that's going on in the background. So this is really how people have been feeling. Again, this is another image that's been uploaded by my incredibly creative colleagues at UCL. So Sisyphus works from home. Instead of pushing the rock up the hill all the time, what do you do when you're sitting at home with a laptop and you have to do things differently? So I want to end by just saying, I think there are three different things we have to focus on in terms of the people side of things. What's needed for teachers? We need to have this changing relationship between the employers who are employing people to teach and the employees, because we've seen a very big shift in the context in which people have been working. Maybe not a huge shift in terms of the pedagogies, but things have been different at one level. We need these deeper connections to really look at people's whole lives and to think about what does that mean when people are teaching, if we're going to have much more distributed workforces in the new normal, whatever that means in the future. And also this shared sense of purpose. Actually, one of the problems with pupils not being at school is not only are they not learning some of the basic subjects, but also many pupils are not getting a proper meal during the day or not having the kind of support that they get at school. So education is much more than disciplinary content, and we have to seriously think about that. So I'm going to stop these slides just now, and I'd be really interested to hear what people think of this.
Brilliant. Well, Alison, tell you what, when we come back in a moment, after Dirk has contributed, I want to just maybe enter that conversation, the dialogue that Arpe talked about, with a question about whether or not your 3-point action plan amounts to a necessary but maybe not sufficient response to Justin's 3 issues, right? In other words, do they collectively mean that we would tackle the problems of the specific, the need for system change and the need to overcome conservatism? So I'll come back to that. But just as I go to Dirk, I'm reminded by virtue, I think, of Alison's contribution that we spent 5 years on a program at the OECD called Innovative Learning Environments, in which we talked about the need to change the use of time, space and people. And Alison, it reminds me that all of what you've talked about there, right, speaks to that agenda. And by the way, I think we can learn from higher education, but equally, I have seen precisely the same responses from the earliest of childcare through to schooling and higher education. So it feels as if the messages that you're giving us are to be found across the whole spectrum of education at the moment. But I think higher education in particular, because of the nature of the learning process, and perhaps the ages and stages and phases of learners have accelerated that. Dirk, come in and tell us how you see the world.
When I'm looking out of my window, it's dark now, but I see the world of Burgundy wine waiting for me. But no, I completely revised what I was going to say as a result of the conversation that has taken place already. But let me start with a reflection on the learning loss during the pandemic. So I'm quite fascinated. I'm trying to read every single study that is now appearing on the learning loss, especially during the school closures. And there is a lot of variation. Let's say between 2 months of learning loss and 6 months of learning loss, depending on the country. We still don't know how the quality of distance education, distance learning is affecting the amount of learning loss that we see. That's something that is waiting for research later on. But my question, the question I have is actually how well that education technology and distance learning operate and did it more harm than good. And I'm coming to the conclusion, which is a rather pessimistic conclusion, that actually it do a lot of harm to the majority of learners during the pandemic. But it did very well for a minority of learners. While we guess that between 20 and 25% of learners actually did very well during the school closures, they were learning, they were able to organize their school day and to plan their own learning process, etc. But the 75% didn't. And I'm not sure that the usual explanations are very strong. The usual explanations being a social-economic and social-cultural background at home. And I admire Allison's pictures, and of course they are absolutely true. The shortage of infrastructure, internet connection, especially women juggling to do all the things that needed to be done, etc. But I'm not sure that socioeconomic background is really explaining a lot. And in the research that I'm seeing about learning loss, it actually explains only a small part of the variance. So what is actually happening? And I would like to come back to Justin's remark on conservatism. I think that's absolutely true. But the problem is that educational technology came into the field with an opposite kind of learning theory, which was, in my view, a very simplistic form of educational progressivism. So the educational technology advocates, when I'm looking back at the old days of the MOOCs, etc., and the kind of implicit learning theory that was behind it, it was very, very much driven by a romantic idea of how people learn. And that's still dominant. So, of course, it's all about learning, but in the meantime, we have discovered that learner-centered pedagogy doesn't work always very well. That some students, some learners benefit from very much teacher-driven instruction modes. So the implicit idea, and you have to know that I'm an educational scientist, and there are not so many educational scientists in the field of education. Most people are economists or coming from the natural sciences or whatever, but I used to spend my early days in academia in educational theory and educational history. So I have a very strong penchant for the, let's say, the theoretical ideas behind the learning conceptions. And I think the romantic idea of learning, which was promoted by Silicon Valley and by most of the edtech companies in the beginning, was simply too what was simply simplistic, and it didn't match with the conservatism of the educational system. So there was a big gap between those two conceptions of how people learn, what the role of motivation is, what the role of, and I noted very much that Ape also referred to intrinsic motivation, but intrinsic motivation is known to work for a minority of learners. There are many people who actually learn because of the dominance of extrinsic motivation. So the educational technology failure during the pandemic has to do, for me, with the kind of ideas about pedagogy, and the conflict that the learner-centered ideas or the variations of learner-centered ideas, how they interacted with the organizational infrastructure. So, and you see that in the confusion of teachers. Teachers did not know what role they were to play. And sometimes the official rhetoric was teachers have to be coaches of self-directing learners, and had to take a whole new repertoire of roles, and they didn't know how to do that. Other teachers just stick to their old ideas of very directive behavior, and they try to replicate that in the technological environment. But I have seen an enormous amount of confusion on pedagogy. And for me, pedagogy is really the core of the question. It's not about technology. It's about pedagogy. It's about the learning conceptions which were behind the organization of the tools. And for me, educational technology is just a tool. But it's with the implicit ideas that come with them that we have to work. So the role of teachers for me is absolutely critical. We have to think about educational technology as amplification of teachers, not as support systems for self-reliant, self-dependent, autonomous learners. But maybe I'll come back to that in the discussion, Tony. But for me, the role of teachers is really very critical.
Okay, let me try this as a place to start. Justin, I want to come back to you about the distinction between, I think, the level of disruption that is going to be required to make the shift that all of you have talked about. So just say a word about how you're at the moment thinking of overcoming your three major concerns: the specific general, the level of switch to whole system change, and the conservatism that you and others have spoken about. I mean, do you see a way through this that would allow the kind of learning that all of you have spoken about? What would be the nature of the disruption that would allow us to harness the power of technology in the service of the kind of learning that Dirk is talking about?
Well, I think Allison's pointed us in exactly the kind of directions that I think we ought to be going, which is that our school systems are only as strong as our investments in them. Our systems for taking care of children and having them learn are only as strong as the social supports that we provide to our families. It doesn't matter what kind of technologies we have available if kids can't get enough to eat, if kids don't have a safe place to sleep, if they don't have healthcare. Beyond the realm of schools, I think there's a lot to do to build societies that truly care for children and their families. Within schools, I think a big theme in Failure to Disrupt is rejecting the idea that there's some kind of disruptive event or process that's going to happen that's going to lead to substantial school improvement. Again, the pandemic was exactly the kind of moment in which education technologists a year or two ago might have predicted would lead to this kind of sea change in practice, and it didn't. When school systems get better, it's because people tinker with those systems and incrementally make them better. Technology can play a role in making them better, but the technologies we have are not sweeping. They're like little pegs. So if you want systems that get better, you make those systems more robust. You give the people in those systems more resources, more opportunities for learning. There'll be technologies that help, just like there have been technologies that have helped in the pandemic. But this is the process of building more robust school systems is not going to be disruptive, sweeping change. It's going to be incremental, shoulder to the wheel work, supported quite a bit by exactly the things that Allison was talking about, and I'm sure could talk much more about.
Well, so Justin, let me connect to Allison, because Allison, I just want to be clear. If we take your 3-point call to action, does that actually amount to something that would respond to Dirk's call for not just a change in the use of time, space, and people, but a fundamental change in pedagogy? Is that what you're learning from higher education? And does it go beyond just a few examples? In other words, is there the potential for this to be a catalyst for system change? I'm not clear about how much you're claiming, Allison.
I think it could be part of a system change, but there's much more to the system than the people who teach. There's also the people who learn. There's the whole of society as well. I do think that we have to think about what's the shared purpose. Why is it? What's the purpose of education? Why are people learning? And I think, especially in a lot of the Western countries, that there has been very much a focus on assessment and attainment of qualifications, which, the whole assessment system in itself needs to change as well. So this new relationship with people who are employed with the teachers, if we have a new normal in the future where for various reasons we don't go to a campus or a school and people are working in a much more distributed way, we have to have new ways of working together. But behind that, we have to think about the pedagogies. I think that Dirk has really, focused us on, the idea that pedagogy is really important. So how is it that people learn? Not everybody learns the same way, partly because our motivations, the reasons why we're learning are very different. And for me, that's been one of the enlightening things about MOOCs. Some of the early MOOCs were about basically putting content online and making it available for people, and then wondering why not everyone was learning, because not everyone was scaffolded around that learning, and some people dropped out, but they learned what they wanted to learn. So again, there could be the assumption that everybody wants to complete the course and gain a qualification, which might not be the motivation. So learning is very complex, and the reasons why people learn are complex. So getting back to your question, Tony, which was really, are these three things going to give us a system change? I don't think they will, but I think there are three very important parts of a bigger system change, which is really focusing on what do we need teachers to be able to do.
I tell you what, Ape, let me just, you respond, I've learnt this, you respond in any way you want to be, you could just completely ignore my question, right? I just want to say that in advance, but I do have a question for you, you might think about it. I thought I heard from you that no matter what you're talking about in terms of system change, you are talking about a fundamental change around the purpose of learning, and that the bypass that you're talking about is a bypass to learning for enhanced humanity, learning that's got some chance of actually being able to deliver for us global sustainability. So I just want to be clear about the way in which you're thinking about how educational technology really can help us as a human species here, and how you're relating that to the current learning system we have, which, as Justin has said, is so conservative. What's the kind of system change that you're thinking about? Is it actually just, it's bypassing any version of a system? What is it?
Thank you, Tony, for the simple answer. So a simple question. I'll try to give you a tweet-long answer to the simple question that you posed. Actually, I've worked with sort of like how technology impacts and can be used in the field of education and learning and training since the late 80s. That's kind of a long track record. And I define myself as with the 4 S's: simple, slow, stupid, and stubborn. And that is why I always need to understand what is it that is actually happening. And I always let more clever people, because there's plenty of them, explain to me what the thing is. And I'm going to simplify these things. This is my job. I was sent to this planet to do this thing. If we want to live a humane life that respects the human rights and lives sustainably on this planet in 2045, we need to create about 3.5 billion new jobs. Those jobs are needed because everyone who is employed can belong to a middle class. That means that they have more than they want to offer to receive something more. In order for those jobs to be born, we need to create, because all of the new jobs are born in new companies, we need to drive entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is driven by people who have visions of doing something in their immediate vicinity that could change the way they lead their lives and make their livelihood better. Everyone, out of 10 companies that are born, 1 is successful enough to employ 10 people. That means that over these 25 years, we need to create about 36 billion startups. And in order to drive that change, we need to educate, because 1 out of 10 is an entrepreneur. We need to teach 35 billion people the idea of becoming entrepreneurial with some kinds of skills, producing some kinds of services to someone in their immediate vicinity or somewhere else. With the current population on our planet, I'm coming to a point where I'm saying we need to do something that the current system cannot do.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Can I just put you on notice? Dirk, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you a question and then respond, but also can you, all of you, get ready for a 30-second final comment, right? And the final comment I think I need to ask you is this the moment of truth for educational technology? Is the COVID-19 environment delivering for us the moment of truth? That's going to be your final 30-second contribution. But I'll come back to you on that, Dirk, and others. But I want to ask you this. Surely it's pedagogy plus. You're not saying to me that if we get the amplification right around teachers with powerful pedagogies, we'll get system change? Are you saying that?
No. I think for system change, you need a lot more because the educational system is dependent on many actors and many rules of the game which need to be changed. But the problem is if educational technology is not capable of disrupting the system, what is going to disrupt the system and leading to system change? I think that the system change will only come from below, from the front line of the system, which is where the learning happens, where the interaction between teachers and learning is happening. So that means empowering learners and empowering teachers. For me, that's a little bit my educational credo. And then build organizational structures around that. And these educational structures will have to be much more flexible, much more variable, much more distributed, like Alison said, etc. So if a pandemic is helping us to rephrase those questions, then there's probably something very good in it. But the problem is that and my boss, Andreas Schlager, would call it the industrial mode of education. We are used to develop education as a one-size-fits-all. We are not yet used to think otherwise. And there are many risks in thinking in much more flexible ways because it will amplify social inequality. But it is intriguing that, and I'm simplifying, educational technology did work during the pandemic for, say, 20-25% of learners, and did not at all for 75-80% of learners. So educational technology really increased enormously the social equality gap or the opportunity gap between those who have and those who don't. And in organizing education systems differently with much more flexibility and much more distributed centers of decision making, we will not solve that problem. We might solve maybe some other problems, but we will not solve this enormous opportunity gap issue. And that's something which keeps me awake at night. If we want to have system change, it will probably be good for some, but not for others.
Understood. Well, colleagues, we have 30 seconds each for final comment. Justin, is this the moment of truth for ed tech?
I mean, I hope the moment is to say that the dramatic claims of the last 2 decades were not true, that education is not on the cusp of saving us. And it may play a role in the incremental improvement of education moving forward. But we should be, there are new hype cycles being proposed every year. And when people come next knocking on our doors saying that AI or data science or learning analytics or VR is on the cusp of transforming our educational systems, I hope we know enough now to say, no, that's not true. If our systems are going to be improved, it's going to be from people and political action, not through new technology.
Ape, your 30 seconds starts now.
Thank you. Well, it's a moment of truth for humanity to start using technology in a smart way to transform what we learn, what we need to learn, because that needs to change. And then how we learn is also another subject. But, putting the people at the forefront of everything, especially the teacher and the kid and the learner, it's that's where we are. That's where we got to go.
Thank you. Alison.
The moment of truth for educational technology is when everybody will tell the truth about the reasons why they're pushing their position in terms of the hype cycles that Justin talks about. So I don't think we've reached the moment of truth. I don't think it takes a world pandemic. I think it takes something bigger, a bigger crisis.
Dirk, you've got the final word.
Well, for me, the pandemic is the moment of truth, in the meaning that the verdict is pretty severe, and the verdict is negative. So it didn't realize what it promised to do, and there are all kinds of excuses, and people and systems are making all kinds of excuses these days. But the potential is still there, but the gap between reality and the potential has never been as big as today.
Alison, Ape, Justin, Dirk, thank you. Fantastic session. I hope those that have joined us have felt as energized as I have. Let's make sure that we send this tape around the world, okay?
Yes.
And thank you so much, Tony, for brilliant moderating again.
Yeah. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Justin, Tony, and Dirk. To say hi to Jean-Claude.
Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.